Mom. I thought I'd do a little interview with you.
Okay.
And this is something that Jessie can carry on for her to remember you, and when she's an adult, and for me, and then also for Jessie's children and Jessie's children's children, because we no longer need to depend on old photographs and written stories about our family. We actually have cheap equipment and cameras and whatnot that will allow us to communicate our story. So I have a bunch of life interview questions that we'll tackle in this video, and we'll see how many we can do at this sitting, and then we'll just continue on when we have more time. Okay?
Okay.
So the first question we're going to ask is, what year were you born?
1936, September 2nd.
Okay. And do you remember what day of the week that was?
No.
Okay. Did your parents tell you anything about the day you were born?
No.
Okay. And where were you born?
Strong Memorial Hospital, I think it was, in town, in Rochester, New York.
Okay. In 1936.
It might have been St. Mary's, I'm not sure.
Okay. And why were you given the first, middle, and your last names?
I was given the first name, Barbara, because my mother and father both liked it. And Emily was because my father's older sister was very nice and very good to them. And so, second name was
Emily.
Emily. And they both liked it. That was my godmother.
Okay. And Wilsey is your dad's name, of course, and that is a common name in Rochester?
Not that common, but it is common, and it's spelled different ways. And if you want to look it up, you can find out a lot about the Wilseys. A professor at the University of Rochester said his name was Dr. Wilsey, but with W-I-L-T-S-E-E, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he had looked into it a little bit, and he's decided that all the Wilseys around Rochester, New York, are related somehow.
Okay, Mom, what is your first most vivid memory?
Well, it's hard to say because infants and toddlers don't separate things out, but I do remember certain things. And I remember my grandfather, Albert C. Wilsey, who was a realtor, coming to take me and my mother out for a ride in his car. And very few people had cars. And we were so excited to ride in a car. And that's one of my first memories.
Okay, to ride in a car, do you remember what kind of car it was, or?
No, I don't remember what kind of car, or whatever.
Okay.
I remember living, because this was the Great Depression, and most people didn't have work. People's homes were being confiscated, which happened to my grandfather, and a lot of bad things were happening. So it was kind of a hard time to get excited and happy about really anything. That's the way people were.
Okay, and that was because of the Great Depression.
The Great Depression.
Mm-hmm. And what was the house like that you grew up in? I know we went to see Deer Cop Drive the day before yesterday. Can you tell us something about the houses or houses that you grew up in? How many bedrooms? What the layout was like?
Well, I don't remember the first apartment we lived in, but then we moved to my grandmother and grandfather's home that the poor guy had to rent, being a realtor, because his own home was confiscated because they weren't keeping up with the payments, which doesn't make any sense, but that's the way they thought in the 1930s. So I remember that a lot because my father had two sisters, Lois and Emily, and they were young girls, and they were lots of fun, and they both had a job, which was lucky, with secretarial stuff, and they were always laughing, and they were just really very dear people. And then Grandma, who was always very, very quiet. She came from a German family, and her mother was an immigrant. And, of course, German immigrants were not highly esteemed back then. And but was a nice house, and we had fun, and Dad had a job someplace, I didn't know where, and Mom didn't have a job because married women with children were not allowed to work. One worker in a family. So that's my early experiences. Then, after a while, my dad got a better job, and I remember going out to this house. That's the one we went to.
Mm-hmm.
And that day and age, it was a really nice house. It was big, had 3 bedrooms, great big yard. I was so excited to see, and I would have my own room. And I remember just going around and looking at everything. And then I heard them talking about going home. And I was so sad. And I crawled under the sofa and hid. And everybody was looking for Barbara because I wanted to stay there. And then they finally explained that they had to pay the mortgage, and then in another couple of weeks we could move into that house. And I was delighted.
Mm-hmm. And how old were you thereabouts?
5.
5, okay. And can you describe the neighborhood that you grew up in?
It was supposedly out in the country, and in this day and age it's not out in the country. It's really has gone downhill, but that street is still kind of nice. And it was a mixture of different kinds of architecture and yard size and everything. But it was a nice street, and I thought we had the greatest hill. In the wintertime, you could go down the hill with your sled. But now that I'm an old lady, I realize that hill was nothing. But it was fun. We had fun with it.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about your parents. When were they born? What memories do you have of them? Now, you mentioned that your dad had a job, that you were born in the Depression. What else do you remember about your parents? Anything about how they raised you, or idiosyncrasies that they had, or what would you like to share about Grandma and Grandpa Wilsey?
Well, my father, evidently, I get this through the grapevine, was not a very good scholar when he was in high school. And so he was flunking all his courses, and he had a car, old beat-up car that he liked to work on and take places instead of going to school. And so anyway, he did not graduate with his class. His father, evidently there was words spoken, and he had to take up some courses, and he graduated the next year. And I can remember my father telling me, you don't do your schoolwork, you're going to be caught in the loop. There's nothing you can do about it. You just have to either drop out or repeat. He said, I was so dumb, I had to repeat to get my diploma from, um, guess I've forgotten the name of the high school he went to, but it's still there, old high school now. And my mother was I get this second hand, but she was a very good scholar, and she was going to get her job as a secretary. And she learned shorthand and, oh, you name it, she was just going to get a good job. And she graduated on time with very high grades. But the economy being what it was, she couldn't get a job as a secretary or even a gopher girl or anything. She could not get it because there were certified women who were already working. So she couldn't get it. So anyway, she always was sorry about that because that was her dream.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember when they were born or how old they were when they had children? And
I'm not sure. I was born in 36, and they'd been married a couple years, and that's all I know.
Okay. What other memories do you have about them? Do you have a special memory about Grandma and Grandpa?
Well, my father's father was a realtor, and even after he lost his house and had to rent to another house, he was always big on making money and, real estate business, on and on. He was full of jokes, smart replies. I really didn't know him very well because we never had a conversation. He was so busy talking to everybody else. So I just was there. And he had married a young woman, whose parents were immigrants, German immigrants. And so in the Rochester area, that put them down because they were immigrants. And she had, when she was young, she had a number of jobs taking care of children. And with one family, who was very wealthy, evidently, sounded like they were, she got a chance to go all the way to California, to the top of California. What is the name of that city?
Not sure. Sacramento.
No, Sacramento's in
San Diego.
That's down. Anyway, they got to go, and it was a wonderful trip, and she was caring for the children, and evidently the man, they were on the train, and they came back, and there was a terrible earthquake in northern California. Mm-hmm. And everyone's heard of the California earthquake.
Yes.
Yeah. So then she married my grandfather, and of course married women did not work outside of their own home.
Uh-huh. Okay. Anything else about your dad or mom you'd like to share? What were they like personally? Their personalities?
My grandmother was very, very quiet. Okay. But she would sing German songs every once in a while. And she liked to cook. And she made some very delicious dishes. The trouble was, it was wartime and very hard to get meat. And so she knew like 1,000 ways to make different dishes using old hens that wouldn't lay anymore. Uh-huh. And we'd have it for Sunday dinner.
Now, this was your grandma or?
My grandma.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Bertha Krumbine Wilsey.
Crumb.
Krumbi, I think, or E.
Uh-huh. And how do you pronounce it?
Krumbine.
Crumbine. How about your mom and dad? What were they like? Their personalities, etc.
My mother and father,
Mm-hmm.
they were very hard working. And
Start with your dad. What was
my
your dad
dad,
like? What did he like to do?
He was
and,
scholarly,
Mm-hmm.
and he never got over having to repeat to graduate from high school. They wouldn't give him his high school diploma till he got some courses. Now that's kind of common, but back then it was awful. And he liked sports, and he had a football scholarship to a New England prep school,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't remember the name of it. Dean Academy, D-E-A-N, Dean Academy. And he was there, I don't know what position he played, but he was there on the football scholarship. And I don't remember what happened was, it wasn't a full scholarship, and his parents had to pay part, and his parents didn't have the money to do it,
Mm-hmm.
so he had to drop out. But he liked Dean Academy, and they were very nice to them, but he just couldn't scrape up the money.
Uh-huh.
A lot of the stories about my parents' lives centered around money. And it was not having money, not being able to do things they wanted. You know, it was very, very, very sad time. And of course, the people who are supposed to be so smart kept closing houses and putting them on sale. Well, of course, they couldn't resell them because
Nobody had any money.
nobody had any money. But that's what they did, and it made a terrible situation for anybody who did not have money.
So your dad liked to play football, and
He played center.
what else did he like to do in his spare
Fish.
time? He fished. Okay.
Yes, and he made his own flies, and he, later on, when we lived in Deer Cop Drive, he would go out like 3 nights a week and go after fish that like to bite at night. I guess all fish like to bite at
Uh-huh.
night. And we ate them, too.
And what was Grandma like?
She was,
Your mom, my grandma.
mom, I know, yeah. She was mercurial. She'd be up and happy, and then she'd be sad. And you look at it now, there may be some problems emotionally.
Mm-hmm. And what did she like to do?
Well, she was very good at sewing, and I don't know whether she liked sewing or whether she had to sew
Uh-huh.
for the kids. And she had friends who'd come over and they'd play different card games. And she always had dinner on table
Mm-hmm.
because that's what my dad liked. And
she raised how many children? You're the first of...
I was the first. And then my brother Philip, and my sister Mary, and my sister Joan.
Mm-hmm.
So there is over a 10-year lapse.
And right now you're 80,
I'm 80.
approaching 81 in September
Right.
2nd, 2017.
Mm-hmm.
And Uncle Phil was born next after he was the second oldest. And he died in the early 90s, right?
He died, yeah.
And he had childhood diabetes, correct?
Yes.
So he was my age when diabetes finally got to him, which
Right.
is pretty good for growing up in that age and surviving childhood diabetes for that long.
And it was.
And then Aunt Mary lives in Texas and is 70, right? Or 71. And then Aunt Joan is 68, 69?
Something like that.
Okay.
We don't go into ages.
So you're all geriatrics at this
Yes,
point.
we're all old. That's another word.
Okay, so Grandma was busy raising you guys in Rochester, New York.
Mm-hmm.
Now, who was more strict, your mother or your father?
That's a very good question. My mother was a yeller. You know, you kids, you better clean up this bedroom, and I'm coming up there, and I'll say. And my father really didn't say too much until it was a crisis. And then he started telling everybody what they should do.
Mm-hmm.
But my father only hit me maybe twice in my whole life with a spanking.
I see.
Smart mouth. He did not like smart mouth.
So usually your parents resorted to not corporal punishment, but
No.
words and, yeah. Okay. And did they have a good marriage in your opinion? I know it's hard to know those sort of things or when you're a kid, and then looking back at it as an adult, you often see things in a different perspective. But if you could go back and see them, would you say they had a successful marriage, or how did that go?
Well, every long-term relationship, whether it's a husband and wife or sisters or neighbors, they're always uneven. People don't go along happy as a lark for 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that they were happily married, yes.
Okay. Now, we know that your family, your father worked as an estimator for...
Cost estimator for it was a company that made glass-lined steel tanks.
And that, to me, that I think of a thermos bottle that you would put coffee in or orange juice or something like that.
Right, except these thermoses were used mainly in Hawaii to can pineapple, because pineapple would not just sit there, you know, in a can. It was full of acid,
Mm-hmm.
and it had to be glass lined before they could put the pineapple juice in there. And so it was a big deal, and the cans only lasted, or the
Glass liners?
glass lined
Mm-hmm.
only lasted a few years, and they had to be replaced.
I see. And and your mom didn't work, so was your family middle class or working class, or how did the Wilsey family compare to families in your neighborhood or in general? Now, looking back with this perspective.
Looking back, I would say my family was working class.
Uh-huh.
But my father was very respected because he was a big reader and knew a lot, quote unquote. And so he was a very respected guy. My mother was a regular housewife. She knew how to cook and she knew how to do her job.
Mm-hmm.
But she would I've never seen her read a book.
I see.
My father was continually reading books. And when I was a kid in elementary school, well, late elementary school, he went to the library in Rochester. I can't remember the name of it, but it's still there. And He'd let me come with him sometimes, and he liked philosophy and stuff like that, and I liked stories. But they let me take him out, and I had a lot to read.
Hmm. And when your family didn't have a lot of money when you were growing up, but when they had money, what did they spend it on?
Oh dear, I don't know. I was just a kid. We went on a vacation every year to go fishing, and we kids had a lot of fun.
Hmm.
They would rent a cottage, and maybe with another couple, and the men would go out at the break of dawn fishing and bring them home, and then we could swim in the water. It was fun. It was very nice.
Okay. And so you had Uncle Phil. Okay, so Uncle Phil, we were talking about Uncle Phil, and you said that he had childhood diabetes, which back in the 30s and 40s was a killer, and you were going to talk about what he was like, because he died in the early 90s. I think I was in the Peace Corps when he died.
Yes, you were.
And I remember that he loved to canoe and fish, and of course he had a farm with Aunt Pat. He was very active. He was also legally blind because of his diabetes, but he managed to own and operate a farm as well as work at Xerox. And he received special training for people who were blind or had problems with their vision. And so he worked at Xerox and had the farm.
He wasn't completely blind. It's just that he couldn't drive a car. He couldn't get a driver's license, and there's certain things he couldn't do. He could if I and my sisters came in a room where he was. He couldn't tell who was who because we're all more or less the same size. But as we would grow closer, he could tell us apart.
Hmm. And when did he lose his vision? How old was he?
He was a sophomore at Cornell. He applied for the 2-year program, and it's not a degree program, but it's for people that are interested in horticulture, things like that,
Hmm.
and animals. So he was in his 2nd year, and he lost his vision right away after that. And so that was the end of his go-round at Cornell.
And so he was in his early 20s then.
Yeah, he was about 21.
Uh-huh. Was he married at the time, or?
No.
Okay. And what else can you tell me about Uncle Phil?
When he was a kid, he was very interested in certain things. But I think because of his diabetes, he was very mercurial. In other words, one day he'd be up and happy, and another day he'd be angry and,
Sullen.
sullen. Hmm.
Yeah.
And it was the hormones, and it was the sugar content of his blood,
Hmm.
and I don't know what all. But it was hard going for him. And Dad, of course, I was 4 years older than he. And Dad tried to do a lot of things with him since he was the only boy,
Uh-huh.
and all these females. It was very, very sad when he lost his eyesight.
Hmm. Um, but it turned out to have sort of a happy ending because he had the farm and was able to get specialized training in the fledgling world of information science, right?
Yeah. Thanks to Bob, your dad.
Hmm.
He was a really, really intelligent guy, and he read a lot. And he during this whole go round, he called Phil and said, "I've been reading that people who are legally blind can find jobs in computers and programming computers. I don't know what all, but he said you should really look into it." He sent him the article. He looked into it himself and sent the information to Phil. And Phil was always very thankful that Bob took such an interest in him.
Hmm.
And after he had been in that field for a while, they put him in personnel because he was very personable when he was not screaming and yelling at you. And he worked there for several, I don't know how many years.
Hmm.
I think it was Xerox.
And Aunt Joan and Aunt Mary are still alive, so we really don't want to dish the dirt on them because
No.
they probably are going to watch this on YouTube or Facebook. But what can you tell me about them? I'm going to grab my phone, but keep talking because I want to make sure that we're right on time here. So why don't you start with Aunt Mary?
Aunt Mary was the third child, and
take it
she
from
was-
the
she was-
perspective of a big sister, because I know that there's a different dynamics for
right,
children,
right.
and
She
so
drove me nuts.
okay, so there you heard it, folks. Aunt Mary drove my mom nuts. Okay, now why do you say that?
Because she liked to go in my bedroom and go through my stuff. And she would conduct tours of my closet. And if I had, a couple of old dried up relics of a prom date, flowers, she would bring them out and show her little friends. My sister Barbara wore that to the prom.
Uh-huh.
It made me furious. And she was a busybody, as I said. And really, when she was in high school, I really didn't see much of her
Mm-hmm.
because there was that much
Difference.
difference in our ages.
Yeah. And as we mentioned, she's 70 and there's about a decade of
Yeah.
a difference.
Yep, that's
So
right.
that's considerable.
That's a lot.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Okay. Anything else about Aunt Mary?
Well, later on, of course, we grew up
Uh-huh.
and realized there was a friendship there. But I didn't like it when it was happening. She was driving me crazy.
And well, with Aunt Joan, there was even more of a difference because she is 68 or 69 now.
Right. When she was born, I
You were
was
about 12 years old.
Was I 12 or 13? I don't know. Anyway, she was a cute baby, and she was a doll baby to me. And I get home from school and say, "Where's the baby?" And I want to feed her her bottle and play with her. And Grandma Wilsey used to say, "Barbara's going to spoil that baby. She should be picking her up and feeding her and everything."
No.
By this time, Mom had had enough babies that anybody would pick up somebody and rock them or play with them. She was glad. Forget about it. Forget what the books say.
Uh-huh. And so the books back then said that children should be swaddled in a blanket or, well, not a long time ago they had different child rearing practices, so they were
Yeah.
more Not
It was a
as,
schedule.
there was a schedule, right?
Yeah, and 2 o'clock feeding.
And
And
so it's more Pavlovian or Skinnerian.
well,
You put them in the box and put the heating lamps on them.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
Skinner, B.F. Skinner. Well, I heard about him, but
Okay.
she didn't believe in that, and Grandma didn't believe in that. But anyway, I was of an age when I could get her out and play with her and keep her going, and so we were very close
Hmm.
as she got older.
Okay. And um, and so then after college, you got married and moved on to Alexandria or Ohio, and then Dad worked for a chemical company, and then he went to Massachusetts and worked or studied under at MIT. So you
Yeah,
were in Ohio and then Massachusetts, and then he decided he didn't want to do chemistry, and so he got a degree, graduate degree from MIT in information science, and
right.
then you ended up in Alexandria. Andrew was already born, and I was born in Alexandria, and at the same time, your sisters and your parents were living their lives, and Aunt Joan stayed here in the New York area, correct?
Yes.
And Aunt Mary moved to Texas with her husband, and she's been down there ever since.
Yep.
Yeah. Did you have pets when you were growing up?
Mm-hmm. We did.
Do you remember what kind of pets they were and their
Oh,
names?
dogs, because my dad liked to hunt, and he was going to teach these dogs to hunt, but somehow it never,
Uh-huh.
because the kids like to pet them
Oh, yeah, so they got
and
spoiled.
hug them and watch TV with them, and they all turned out to be very pleasant, sweet animals, but I don't think they did much hunting.
Okay, and do you remember, did you have a favorite pet, or do you remember them?
Well, when during the war, when we were in elementary school, a friend of my Uncle Kenny's brought over his dog because he was in the Army and he was going probably to Europe. And so he had this little dog. Well, she was pretty big at that point. But anyway, it was a white dog with lots of fur and a brown ear and eye. And he had squared it with my mother and father that we would watch his dog until he got home from the war. And so I can remember Phil and I looked the dog over, and the tail was wagging. It was a white dog with the nice markings, of course. And off they went to Europe. And we loved that dog. And that dog put up worse than any prisoner of war camp could possibly, because the dog wanted to play with us, but he didn't like some of the things we decided to do. But we loved him, and Phil especially loved him. And the fellow was in Europe for 3 years, something like. It was a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And the dog was always there, and Phil loved to give the white dog a bath. And so the dog found out every time Phil started filling a big bucket with water, because that meant bath time. And the dog would run away and hide until Phil forgot about her. And then everything was okay.
Uh-huh. Do you remember the dog's name by any chance?
Terry.
Terry. Okay.
White with a brown ear and eye.
So what became of Terry
Well,
did the man come back from the war and?
yeah, and Mom said no. Joe is Terry's owner, and we were just keeping Terry for a while, but now Joe is back from the war, and we've got to let her go. And so Phil and I were just, it was so sad. And here comes the owner. He was a nice kid who'd aged, I could tell you, being in Europe all that time. And my mother kept saying, now you be nice because it's his dog. And so we kind of hunkered down and hid. And he played catch with Terry and, give him a back scratch. And he was with my Uncle Ken. And he was so happy to see and the dog. And then he said, well, kids, you're doing a good job. And you can keep Terry. We were so happy. And we kept Terry till he was an old dog.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what happened. It was after I got married and moved out.
Oh, wow.
It was a long time.
Mm-hmm. We touched on the Depression. What about World War II? Because you mentioned Terry going off to Europe. What was it like for you growing up as a child during World War II? What was the atmosphere like? And the Depression had its own obstacles for the community to overcome and to grapple with. And World War II was also presented its own challenges. And what was that like?
Well, I was a kid, and there were things you could go to help the war effort, and we were very aware of war, and that people were being killed, things like that. And we gathered little puff weeds because they could be used like in parachutes or something like that. I'm not sure. And of course in the movies, we rarely went to the movies, but it showed the war was terrible. And people would put a decoration on their front window with how many soldiers they had from that war.
Uh-huh.
And showing
stars in the window.
Right, stars in the window. And they were all, it was red, white, and blue kind of stuff, but every once in a while you'd see a gold star, and that meant somebody was killed.
Mm-hmm.
And so Uncle Kenny kept writing letters, and we listened to his records, and they had records they could make toward the end of
So Uncle Kenny was your father's?
My Uncle Kenny was Mom's younger brother.
Okay, and so he went off to war.
He went off to war.
Okay.
And his brother, Mother's other brother, tried to enlist, but he had some trouble with his ears and his hearing, and they wouldn't allow him.
Mm-hmm.
And then my other uncle, Mother's brother, had a couple little children, and so he was exempt.
I see. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's see. I think for this session, maybe one more question.
All right.
And then it'll be time for you to go to your birthday party. And then afterwards, we can do some more.
Okay.
If you want to. Okay, so now let's talk about you as a child. And this is a chance for you to divulge anything that you want for posterity's sake.
Well, I was faultless.
You were faultless. Okay, we already knew that. And you still are. It's faultless.
That's true.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what was it like growing up and being faultless?
Well,
what were you like? How would Aunt Mary and Aunt Joan and Uncle Phil and your parents describe you The good and the bad.
All right, the good. I liked school, and I was a great reader. And when my class would go up a notch to the next level for reading, I'd already read it. And so I was a really, really good reader. Loved reading. I was bossy because I was the oldest of 4 children.
Uh-huh.
And that makes you bossy. But fortunately, my siblings didn't spend much time worrying about that because they did what they wanted to anyway.
Uh-huh.
Phil, with his diabetes, was not easy to live with. And I think he would agree to that because of the sugar content of his blood.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he seemed to do okay when he got to high school and all. And I said I was bossy, I'm sure.
And you like to read. You're a good student.
Love to read. Very good student, yeah.
Uh-huh. What did you like to eat and do for
everything,
fun?
Everything.
Uh-huh. Was your mom a good cook? I've heard stories contrary to that notion.
Not from me.
Uh-huh.
But she always had plenty of food. So that was good. But we never had sweets for dinner because of Phil's diabetes.
I see.
And that was probably good.
Yeah.
We only had birthday cakes. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
So
you like to eat everything?
Just about,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And
yeah.
what did you do for fun growing up?
Well, I was a Girl Scout.
Uh-huh.
And I took it very seriously, and I had all the badges and went to Girl Scout camp. And so that's one thing I really liked, that stimulation.
Mm-hmm.
And went to Sunday school, was big on Sunday school. A couple times I got in, girls were teasing me or being nasty, and I told Daddy about it, and he wrote a letter to the principal, and it stopped.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, boy, Daddy is a powerful guy. He can just call the principal and bang, all these nasty girls. But I think the thing that motivated me most was reading books.
Mm-hmm.
And
is that why you became an English teacher?
No, that's another story. But the reading was I just loved it. I loved it. And you're not thinking in terms like this, but then when you take your SATs, you know all that stuff.
Uh-huh.
Not the mathematics or anything, but because I'd read all those books. And it was before television.
Mm-hmm.
We got our first television set when I was in 9th grade, I would say.
Okay.
So I had all the basics down.
So before 9th grade, you were part of the radio generation. Did your family have a radio?
Mm-hmm.
Did you listen to old-timey, well, what we consider now old-timey radio programs, like The Shadow Knows and
Yeah,
Fibber McGee's Closet?
right. You
all that?
name it, we had it.
Okay. And so what kind of games or toys did you play? Do you remember?
Well, I had doll babies when I was in 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade. And we played outdoorsy things and ice skates, and there was a slight grade in the road in front of our house, and we had skis and you name it. A lot of outdoor type things.
Uh-huh.
And Girl Scouts was a wonderful thing for me because the stuff that I had in school, I caught on right away, most of it. So Girl Scouts gave me another thing to work on.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And Girl Scouting is, I don't think they do it anymore, but I loved it, living out in the
Camping
country like that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, camping and cooking and, sewing and all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
I had all those little things on my sleeve, Mom, soda mom.
Oh, okay. All
Girl
right.
Scouts was good.
All right. Let's cut it off right now, and we'll start up later on.
Okay.
That was a long time.
Yeah, if you make it too long, then nobody wants to hear it.
Well, what I'll do is cut out pieces. I can take it all and put it in my video editor. But really, this is for Jessie and her family when she gets married and has kids. How many kids are you going to have, Jessie?
I don't know. Maybe I'll have none. Maybe I'll have one. Maybe I'll have two. Maybe I'll have seven. Maybe I'll have five.
All right, so let's go back to your childhood,
Okay.
where we left off.
Is that me?
Yeah, that's you right there. And it looks like we're transmitting and picking up the sound. So, let's move on to your teenage years in high school and college. What was it like being a teenager in the 50s, and what kind of music did you like, and how did you dress, and in college as well? And beyond that, how is it different from today?
See, I don't know. Because I'm not teaching school anymore.
Okay. Well, what was it like when you were going to school?
Okay.
What were the differences?
Well, I'd have to compare it with other country schools because the kids mainly were from farming
Uh-huh.
people.
So, and how did farming people behave? How did they dress? And did you drive?
No, I never learned how to drive until I was married to your father.
Okay, so that was in college then,
It
or
was-
after
It
college.
was after college. Yeah.
Okay. And so when you were a teenager, what kinds of things did you do?
I was a teenager. Well, they didn't have any teams for girls. Like the boys had baseball and all summer long and things like that. There was nothing, nada, for girls.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't get a job because I wasn't old enough. So it was summer was kind of not nice, really boring.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to the library with my father, and we took a few trips with the whole family. Small trips, go fishing. But summer was really pretty
Dull.
dull. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There was nothing to do. And I didn't have any money, so I couldn't go to the movies most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And there was the television was nothing,
Mm-hmm.
And so as usual, I did a lot of reading.
Mm-hmm. So you got through high school and you graduated, How big was your high school class?
It was about 52,
Okay.
55.
And when you graduated, what kind of dreams and hopes and dreams did you have?
Well, of course, I wanted to go to college, and I was smart in school. I got, on standardized tests and everything, did well. But my father didn't have any money for college, and I did have several scholarships from various and sundry places, like the faculty, a couple $100 a year, it's all stuff like that. The area where I lived had run by the county, had an exam, and then people with the highest scores got a certain amount of money. And I wasn't in this. Well, this is for a whole county, like everything in Monroe County.
Mm-hmm.
They had so many scholarships to give away to make up for the fact, I think, that this state didn't have a good scholarship program. Didn't have it was kind of just plain messed up,
Mm-hmm.
And so I wasn't one of the 50 in this whole county, but I was like 55, 58. So I snuck just underneath because people were not going to go to school in New York. They were going to Harvard or someplace like that in another city
Mm-hmm.
or area. So that's what cuts it down. So that was a big help. And I've forgotten how much it was. It doesn't seem like much now, but back then I was up like $500 a semester. That's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, I went my freshman year. I lived at home, took the city bus, all the way from near where I lived, all the way across town. And it took, maybe 40 minutes at least to do that, to go to the campus on the other side of the city, because the University of Rochester had separated the men and the women. And when they got money, I can't remember the name of the guy, but it was all put for men's education.
Okay.
And so they built a beautiful campus over near the river, and the girls, women, were going to school in the tumble-down buildings from 1850, when the University of Rochester was founded. Same buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lot of legal pulling and pushing. And anyway, in my sophomore year, I moved over with all the women to the river campus. And that was integration of scholars, not the races. And that was a big deal. And it was good, too, because the girls were quite quiet when they had a lecture, and they'd be sitting there writing everything down as fast as they could, whereas the men would argue with the professor or would make smart comments or something like that. And I was amazed that they would have such nerve to talk to. Well, the girls all thought they were like demigods.
Mm-hmm.
But that wore off the first year. And then it was more equal.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big change. Then at the end of my sophomore year, well, I saved up enough money to go to college full-time my sophomore year, because I'd saved everything. I would save a stick of gum to be able to pay my tuition and everything I had going. And I wasn't living at home. I was living at the campus. And then I knew my money was going to die. Some of them wouldn't die, but some of them would. So I wrote a letter to the Grants Review and said, if you don't give me some money, I'm going to have to drop out. And they came through with a handsome amount of money. It was wonderful. And I only had to work, a few jobs off and on. I wasn't constantly employed, as well as doing all my own work to get my degree. So that went on for 2 years, and I graduated on time.
Mm-hmm. Great. And what was your degree in?
Arts and science or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
My major was a combination of history and English literature.
And what kind of jobs did you have in college?
Oh, giving out, at Christmas time, giving out samples of seal test eggnog. And the guy that was in charge of that, this was downtown, I had a big store, loved me because he said, oh, you're not afraid to go up and across the people. They're going to buy and I sold a tremendous amount of seal test eggnog.
Uh-huh.
So all these men were waiting for their food to come through, and I said, would you care to sample some seal test eggnog? Okay, and he said, well, yeah, it's pretty good. I'll take 2. It was all kinds of jobs like that. It wasn't any high-class secretary job.
And then you were a nanny also? Is that correct?
Yeah, the first year after I graduated from high school, I couldn't find a job. I was too young. 17, and you had to be 18.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went down to every city has a agency, at least they used to, and you went in there and told them what your field was and on, and they would give you leads, where to go, people that were hiring. And so I got a job taking care of 4 children in a big, big fancy house on East Avenue, which was really rich. And there were 4 children, and the oldest was 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So they were having a baby every year.
Yeah.
And it was a nice job. The people were very nice. And Sunday morning, Mrs. I can't think of her name offhand, would take me to the bus stop. I'd ride all the way across the town, and Mom would pick me up, and I'd have 2 days off.
Mm-hmm. So you were going to school and you were a nanny, and
I wasn't going to school. That was summer.
oh, for summer.
Summer job.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So while you were at the University of Rochester, you met my father, Robert Freeman. How did that come about?
I can't remember. But
You're both students,
we're
and
both students. He's a year ahead of me.
he tested some of your seal test eggnog.
I can't remember. But he belonged to a fraternity that had a lot of really nice young men in it. And I was going out with this one fellow. He was nice. But, I wasn't crazy about him, but I got to know some of the other men in that fraternity, and that's where I met Bob.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, I really like this one. And so I went out with him a few times, and First thing you know, I was going steady with him.
Uh-huh.
That didn't happen till the his senior year and my junior year.
Oh, okay. So he was a year ahead of you then.
Yes.
Okay. Um, so what was it that you liked about him?
He was smart. And he was good looking. And he was nice, you know. He was very quiet and thoughtful, but he was also smart, and I liked that. And we kind of liked doing the same things.
So, and how did marriage come about? You were still in college, or?
I was a senior in college. He was a freshman at his program at MIT. And we decided to get married that summer.
Okay, so he was already at MIT when you got married.
Right.
Okay.
He was in a 2-year program to get a master's degree in a science, but it wasn't making your living with science. It was, I don't know.
So he got his
In
degree.
other words, he didn't have to get a bachelor's or a master's degree in some kind of esoteric area. That job was bringing information into everyday life or
Okay.
things like that.
That was the predecessor to computer science, I think.
Yes.
Information science.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. But that was his graduate degree, and his undergraduate degree was in chemistry, correct?
Right, chemistry.
Okay.
But with a degree in chemistry, you can't get a job. They want you to have a PhD.
I see.
And he didn't have any money to get a PhD, and besides that, he found out he really didn't like chemistry too well.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of a boring subject, you know.
Well,
A lot of
I guess
people
it
don't
is
agree.
to some people, yeah. Depends on who you are.
Yeah.
So you got married, and then what happened?
We went back to Boston
Uh-huh. So you lived in Boston.
and had a tiny apartment with the bedroom in the back and the kitchen in the front. It was all mixed up.
Mm-hmm.
These very, very, very old houses, row houses. Beacon Hill. And I worked some, office job, and he finished his master's degree at MIT. And that was the best thing that he could have done.
Uh-huh. And so after he finished his master's degree, you didn't stay in Boston. You moved to Ohio?
We moved to Ohio, and he got a job with a learned journal of chemistry. And he really didn't like it very much. People would send in articles, and he'd read them and change them, and they'd come out with a magazine every month.
Mm-hmm.
But Ohio, at that point in time, was just boring.
Neither of you liked it.
No, we really didn't like it.
Uh-huh. So then
There
what?
was nothing to do.
Uh-huh.
I mean, football. That was it.
And so you decided to move?
He started looking for a new job.
Okay. And that took him where?
Took him to Washington, D.C., and he was working for a publication put out for Weather Bureau,
Mm-hmm.
weathermen. And he worked with a real nice guy, he had a nice family, but it was a tiny, thing, tiny publication. But he was there for a year and a half or 2 years, and then he got a job with the federal government.
Mm-hmm. And now was that with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration?
Yeah.
That's one of the jobs I remember going to his office.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It was a good job, and it was something that was needed. Guess who else put out the Weather Bureau, you know?
So when you were in Ohio, Andrew was born.
Yes.
Okay. And how would you describe Andrew as a little baby and a boy?
He
What
was
was that
very
like? And what
calm.
were you like as a first-time mother?
Well, I had two younger sisters. One of them was a baby when I was in high school.
Uh-huh.
So it didn't bother me. Changing diapers and all that.
Uh-huh.
And I stayed home. That's what mothers did back in that day and age.
Mm-hmm. And what was Andrew like?
Andrew? He was very calm, a lot like Bob.
And he still is.
Well, he's real smart,
Very smart,
quiet,
tall, 6'4" like Dad.
right? And good-natured.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. That was
Okay, so that was in Ohio, and then
no. It was when he got the job with Chemical Abstracts. Well, I mean, he went to Washington.
okay, so Andrew was born in Ohio, though, correct?
Right.
Okay, and then when he went to Washington, that was when you were living in Holland Hills in Alexandria, Virginia.
Right.
That's when I was born,
Right.
and the world was never the same.
I guess not.
So what was I like, and how was Alexandria? Describe life, because
Well,
that was 1964, and he was born in 61, Andrew. And so now we've progressed quite a few years from your childhood through college, and you're a young couple, a young mother, and you're 29 years old, and then in 1964, here I come into Alexandria, Virginia.
right.
So that was 2 years after Kennedy was assassinated.
No, it wasn't. So Kennedy. Well, it wasn't.
He was.
It wasn't 2 years. It was about 1 year.
Okay.
Because we decided to get a house in where we did
Where were you when Kennedy was assassinated?
home, listening to the radio, cleaning the house. People in Washington were thunderstruck.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was just couldn't believe what you were hearing on the radio.
That's one of those questions you're supposed to ask when you're doing these kind of interviews. Where were you when Kennedy died?
Everybody remembers.
Yeah, that and the Apollo moon landing.
I remember that too, what I was doing.
I remember that too.
Do you?
The boomers next door were watching it on TV. And
Oh, yeah?
they told me, now you guys remember this. This is important. So I did. I remembered it.
Yeah, well, good.
Okay, so what was I like? Andy was calm and intelligent. And,
You're putting words in my mouth, and I don't like that.
well, no. And then I came along, and I was completely different.
You were completely different.
Yeah.
Right.
So when you let me out of my chains and up from the basement, what was I like?
Oh, you were interested in everything. There was no thing too small for you to put in your mouth and chew on. Running after the neighbor's cat, you know.
Uh-huh.
You learned how to talk very early. Talkative. During that time, we moved to Holland Hills, and I put Andrew in daycare. Not daycare, but morning lessons. They didn't have kindergarten in the state of Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted kindergarten for your children, you had to pay for it. So, did that, and you were a handful, really,
Mm-hmm.
because you were curious about everything, and you would do things that scared the living daylights out of me. A little bit later, I'm talking about. For example, getting the neighbors, or what do you call it? You stand on it and you push with your foot.
Pitchfork.
No, it's got wheels, and you can. Anyway, you take it up the hill, and you get going.
Wheelbarrow.
It has handles like this,
Oh, okay.
and two handles, and it would go along, and it would go down the hill
Uh-huh.
with you standing on it. And you
Do
know,
things that were dangerous.
right.
Uh-huh.
And yelling at you did not.
And it still doesn't make any difference, does it?
You just did. If it felt good, you did it.
Uh-huh.
And so at that point, I went back to graduate school and was taking 1 or 2 courses each semester.
Mm-hmm.
Because, to tell you the truth, at home with 2 small children is not stimulating to me. And, you tend to kind of shrivel up. And so I started taking classes, and after about 2.5 years, I got my master's degree.
Uh-huh. Now that was when the Vietnam War was in swing, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I remember, I think you told me you had to take your exams stepping over the bodies
Oh,
of
that's
protesters.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was at the University of Maryland, and the students were furious. They were just furious. They were a little bit scary.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, what was it like living during the Vietnam War?
Oh,
You were already past your college years, and both of you and Dad were professionals, so it wasn't like you could turn on and tune in and drop out, or whatever the saying was. And
we could do that. I think that's what we did. But we did go to marches against the war and all this stuff. We didn't think it was going around the world to somebody's rice paddy when you had no clear objectives and all this, and the people didn't want you there. It was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of guys got killed, and anyway.
So what was it like living in Holland Hills? That was a progressive
Whoa, they were
neighborhood,
against it, I'll tell you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And so you took us Andrew and I, to some protests, and
Yep.
because we lived right outside of Washington. so-
Right. If we knew it was going to be safe, and you could read in the newspaper if it looked like it was going to be safe or if it's going to be they're crazy people. And we never took you or even went ourselves for things that looked as if they were going to be dangerous.
Mhm. So let's get back to Andrew and I. Do you have a favorite story you like to tell about one of us or both of us?
I have so many stories I could tell. just sit down and write them out
Uh-huh.
because you were intelligent children. You could get into some messes, I'll tell you.
Do you remember, well, the reason why I said pitchfork when you mentioned me getting into trouble was when we were living at West Hill Drive in Maryland. We moved there when I was 5, if I'm not mistaken. Sometime thereafter, I think I was probably 8 or 9, I found a can of red
Oh!
and thought it would be really cool
Ah!
to puncture it with a pitchfork. And I remember I punctured it, and this red paint went all over my face and shirt, and I was hard to see, and I walked around from the driveway, or the carport where I'd punctured the can,
Yeah.
and I couldn't really get in. Well, I don't remember, but I remember meeting you at the door, and your first response was to panic. Oh my God, oh my God. And then you realized I wasn't hurt. And
Yeah, I
then
thought there was blood. I thought there was blood all over you.
and then your next response was just this ire, this
I can't believe
anger
you did that.
overcome, and I could see it in your face. Oh my God, I really screwed up this time.
Well, the first thing I did was take you in the kitchen and give you something to hold in front of your
Uh-huh.
nose so you could breathe. And then I called the Poison Control Center. And they said, take it off as soon as you can. And but watch him very carefully, because if he shows any difficulty breathing, bring him right in or call for an ambulance. But you didn't show any difficulty breathing.
Uh-huh.
I got you all cleaned up, and still you were fine. So.
Okay.
Oh.
Well, moving on. So, during, I mentioned that happened at West Hill Drive in
Right.
Rockville, or North Bethesda was the zip code area.
Right.
So we had, I guess Dad had been, his office had been moved somewhere downtown, and so you guys decided to move to Maryland, and we ended up in Rockville, Maryland.
Right.
And I remember I was about 5 years old, 6 years old, and Mrs. Baker was my kindergarten teacher, and so it was a nice, very nice, upwardly mobile neighborhood, and we had a lot of different professionals around us. And I remember having a nice childhood, and you used to make different kinds of cakes. When the Apollo program was going on, you made an Apollo rocket. And,
Yep.
and I like trains, so you made a train cake.
Yep.
And I remember you always did the holidays in grand style with homemade gingerbread houses for Christmas, and carving pumpkins for Halloween. And
Yep. But look at it this way. I was an educated woman, and I didn't have a job.
uh-huh.
Keeping house was my job.
Mm-hmm.
So.
So when did you get a job? That was you said you stayed at home until I was 12. Is that correct?
No, I don't think you were 12. I'd have to look at calendars and stuff.
Or maybe
But-
6th grade?
We moved to, what was the name of that?
West Hill Drive?
West Hill Drive. And that is when I got interviews with different school districts, and after about a year, I got a job. I started working, and we had this really, really nice woman who had small children herself come in and be with,
Uh-huh.
keep house. And she did it for us for 2 years. and she was very, very, very nice.
Was that Bridget?
Was it Bridget? No, I can't remember her name. She was Hispanic,
Oh.
and her husband worked over near that road that goes out of Washington, and where all the scientists and everybody live.
Okay, Potomac?
No, not that far west. Anyway, she was nice, and she was there full time. And then I can't remember exactly how I fixed the babysitting, or not babysitting, but taking care of you.
Mm-hmm.
But you were older then, and you understood a lot more.
Yeah. So, family life, I remember Andrew and I could listen to pretty much whatever we wanted to, and pretty much read. There was never any. It was a permissive household in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
I remember. And I can remember when I was 14 years old playing Jimi Hendrix on our living room stereo while you cooked up stir-fry vegetables in the kitchen. And your comment was, I think Jimi Hendrix was highly overrated. Do you remember that?
No.
But that's a story I like to tell because you were willing to listen to Jimi Hendrix at a loud volume in the living room while you cooked stir-fry dinner for us. Let's talk about vacations. What was your favorite vacation during this time, or when you were raising Andrew and I?
Well, we really had a lot of nice vacations, and we had tents. We started out with like a 4-person tent, but that didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
It was
A canvas tent, and you touched the edge, and it would start dripping.
Yeah. Oh, it was heavy, and and you were right next to each other.
Mm-hmm.
It was so. We bought art, the art, top of the art tents,
Mm-hmm.
and they were very lightweight, and you could put them away, and it was great. So that was fun. We liked to camp out, and it was cheap too.
Come here, Jessie.
These are posters for Grandma's show.
Oh, posters for Grandma's show. Okay.
Oh, great.
So we'll get you to talk about these at the end, all right? Okay. So I remember going to the Outer Banks. We had talked about that,
Mm-hmm.
and that was fun. I remember going to Maine,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a lot of fun. Lake Sislodopsis
Yeah.
and Acadia
We went
National
there
Park.
2 or 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
The only way you could get to the cabin was by canoe or, motorboat or something like that. There was no road in.
Was there any other vacation or thing you like to do?
We took you to Europe a couple times.
That's right. We went to Spain and Portugal and
Yeah,
England and Scotland.
right.
Uh-huh.
And in Scotland, they called you the wee laddies,
The wee laddies.
the wee lads.
Uh-huh. Now let's look at family in general. You said Andrew is like Dad. Am I like somebody? I remember Grandma saying I was like Grandpa Wilsey.
Grandpa Wilsey?
Yeah. Your dad.
My dad. That you were like my dad.
Yeah.
Huh.
In mannerism.
Is that so? I had never thought of that. My father was very quiet, and kind of an intellectual in a small way. And he really didn't follow any sports teams. I don't know. I have to think about that. Interesting.
Okay. Well, let's see. Might have to skip around here a little bit. What do you think are your... Let's look at you now. We've discussed other people.
Well, don't expect true answers.
Okay. Well, you can lie if you want to.
Okay.
How would you describe yourself? What are the three best things and three worst things about you?
Oh, well, I'm old now, certifiably old. And,
So you must have lots of
well,
things to say.
yeah, I have plenty to say. But I don't have the self-confidence that I had when I was raising children and in graduate school and all that. I just don't have it. I know a lot more, and so I guess I'm more of a scaredy cat now than I was
Okay.
when I was raising children, and of course, calling the poison control center and all that,
I think maybe that's something that comes with being young and because I know I'm 52 now.
Mm.
There's especially with physical things like jumping around on rocks or on trails, and at one time that I wouldn't think twice about jumping over a space where I could fall and hurt myself really badly. And now I have to weigh these decisions. And
That's because you're smarter.
consider if I'm physically capable of doing such things.
Yeah.
And so I guess maybe as you get older,
You're more cautious.
you're more cautious, and you don't think you're going to live forever,
That's right.
and all that.
And you have responsibilities.
And you have responsibilities.
Yeah.
So let's get on to some more questions about you in particular. So you say you're less confident with. So what?
Confident, not competent.
Confident.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else has changed in your life? Or what were you like? How would you characterize yourself when you were younger and now, if you want to?
How am I different? Well, basically, you're the same person. It's just that different parts of your behavior and thought rise up at different times according the stimulation you have or things of that kind.
Right.
You don't just go through life like this.
Mm-hmm.
They're all different kinds. Some of the times you do, but other times, one of the worst things that I think happened was that when you broke your elbow and you were in traction, and you were in the hospital for a while before they let you out. I mean, I was so worried about you, and so was your father. And had to get substitute teachers, and finally it calmed down when we could see that it was. But I was so worried about you. But there was nothing I could do, and nothing your father could do. But things like that.
Do you think that people are born with certain core personality characteristics, or do those change?
I don't know.
Okay. So, if you could do it all over again, what would you do, and what would you do differently in any aspect of your life?
Well, that's a very good question because, the old I should have said. I should have said. Um, when it's too late to say anything, it's beyond. But I'm very glad I had two children, and I would have liked to have more, except Bob didn't want any more children.
Uh-huh.
And so, but we had two, that's plenty. And I don't know. I think I tried to break through Bob's reserve
Uh-huh.
and his, um, stay away from me kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, he was an introvert, I would say.
Oh,
Just like Andrew.
well,
And that's part of
that's
their
part of
personality that, you really can't change, I don't think.
not very much. For example, we'd be invited to a party in Holland Hills, and Bob would go in a chair and sit there for the whole evening and not talk to anybody. Unless he happened to already know them a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of when you got remarried to Risk Harper, and the extended family would come over for a football game, especially Super Bowl. And where's Peter? He's upstairs in the master bedroom watching Jacques Cousteau.
Yeah.
Because I really didn't follow sports, so
Yeah.
And that became sort of a family, joke, a little chiding on me, which it doesn't bother me at all, because I really enjoyed Jacques Cousteau much more than football. But yeah, that was difficult, and so then one of the things why you ended up getting divorced, I would imagine, just
Well,
what was it? You were married for quite a long, 19 years. And
something like that.
we
Yeah.
had gone up to Seattle and lived for a year, and he studied at University of Washington and
Right.
moved back, and like so many other modern couples, you all did some counseling and all that, and
Well,
didn't work out.
Bob didn't do any counseling. I'll tell you that. He wouldn't.
Uh-huh.
He wouldn't go.
He didn't want to go.
Yeah. He went a couple times and said no. He wouldn't go.
Uh-huh.
But I don't know.
Well, let's talk about, because we're not going to get to the bottom of in this conversation about why you got divorced, and sum it up in a nutshell. But let's continue on with This Is Your Life, and talk about Risk Harper, who several years after your divorce, you met Risk and got married and were together for over 30 years, right?
Right.
So that's even longer than you were married with Dad,
Right.
which was 19, if I did my counting right.
Mm-hmm.
This is getting the sound. Hello, test. Yeah. Okay, so, and I remember at that point I was just finishing up high school and into college, and married, moved from Rockville out to Lake Caroline, Virginia, entering another stage of your life, and you were very involved with Risk's grandchildren. You had 3 sons.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, if you could grade each phase of your life, what was that? It seems to me that was a very satisfying time of your life. Is that true?
Yeah.
And what did you like about that period?
Oh, um, I really can't say. I was on top of things at work. That was, in other words, it wasn't all new to me. I knew the ropes in my high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I was
Jessie? Oh, I'm sorry. Jessie, come here.
There's a red button on your camera.
I know. I see it.
Okay.
What do you want to say?
I thought it was not working.
Oh, okay.
Earlier it said like kind of like the green one, make it work, and now you said that.
Okay. It's working.
Okay.
So you were on top of your game professionally.
Yeah, I felt that I was in a good place.
Mm-hmm. And what else?
Now this, you're talking about after Risk and I got married?
Yeah, well, I guess 30 years has its ups and downs too with someone, as you mentioned, in any relationship. It's not all wine and roses.
Well, Risk, he had a very funny sense of humor. And he liked to do things, you know, and he wasn't a loner.
Uh-huh.
And everybody has their faults. But there are some faults you can put up with easier than other faults.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I guess that was what it was all about.
Okay. I'm going to check your radio. Okay, that's good. So you liked that period because you were on top of your game professionally, and what else?
Well,
Then you retired, so you were out.
well, after, yeah, I was retired. I worked for about 10 years, and then we moved. In fact, Jim Treston, remember him?
Mm-hmm.
And we had them over for dinner, and we were saying, oh, the traffic is so terrible around here, we can't get out of the driveway, and we hate it, you know. And he said, well, if you don't like it here, why don't you move? We said, what? Move? Where would we move? And that really got us thinking.
Uh-huh.
And that's when we decided to find a place we liked that didn't have the traffic. Because you have to put up with that traffic every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when we decided to move to Virginia.
And it just got worse and worse too, didn't it, after you left?
Oh, the traffic?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, horrible. Horrible. And we weren't young kids anymore.
Yeah.
But we liked Virginia, and a lot of nice people there. We loved our house.
Mm-hmm.
We splurged. You never get your money out of if you have a swimming pool in your yard. It's always a money grabber.
Uh-huh.
But we did enjoy it, and we had a lot of parties. And
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about right now. Riss died 3 years ago,
about that.
and after a year of living in Ladysmith at your lakefront property, you decided too big, don't need it, too much of a hassle,
And I'm getting old.
and you're getting old. So with the help of Craig and Aunt Joan, and I helped you with a little bit of the move here, you're in Pittsford, New York, so you've kind of come full circle to where
I have, yeah.
you grew up in Rochester, which is about half an hour away, and now you're in Pittsford in your nice senior retirement luxury living, the good ship lollipop, as I call it, where every day is happy landing on a chocolate bar.
Supposedly.
So what do you do to occupy your time?
Well, of course, I love to read, but I haven't read very much. I don't know why. But I try to walk, and I go to presentations. They have about 5 or 6 every week,
Uh-huh.
different topics.
From learned people, too, from the University of Rochester.
Right.
Because
There are
this,
learned people right
Uh-huh.
here in this.
that's right. I mean, they would, yeah, obviously you have people that are
Clientele.
well off enough that they had professional lives when they
Yes.
were working and had specialized and had some expertise
Right.
that allowed them to retire, in a style that where they could afford to live at some place like
Right,
this.
right.
Hmm. So you have lots of people that are very knowledgeable about things, and they present, they give talks, and
Yeah, and people from the history department come and talk about something, and
Mhm.
they're very interested in health, you know, things like that. I'm interested in it too. I miss my car, but when I figured out how much it was costing me to keep that car, I said, I'm not going to do that,
Mhm.
because they'll take you any place you want, right here.
Yeah.
So I think I did come back to my beginnings, you might say. But it was a good thing to do. And one of the loneliest, most hurtful things was to be in that big house in the cold weather. And I would say I would be out playing bridge, come home, the house is cold.
Uh-huh.
That's, turn on lights. And
Yeah.
it was very depressing.
Mhm.
So said I've got to go someplace where I have friends, people I know.
Yeah. You have your family up here, and Aunt Joan in particular,
Right?
and
And Joan and Craig have been really, really nice to me.
mhm. And you have your new friends, and
Mm-hmm.
if you want dinner, it's just a walk down the hallway, and you've got very nice accommodations there, and you have your own kitchen if you don't want to eat in the dining room. And
Right.
um, so, how does life now compare? Does it compare favorably with the rest of your life, or do you feel like you're um, what's the expression? Sitting in the cat's cradle, or that's not it.
Cats
But
meow.
is it is it a sense of I have arrived and this is
No, the sense is my head is still above water, thank God.
you made it this far?
Made it this far.
Uh-huh. Okay, but you're still worried that you'll be living under a bridge, knowing you that
Well, it's in the back of my mind.
you're thinking about how it's all going to head south very fast, right? Um, I wanted to touch on quilting because that was such a major part of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you'd like to say about that? You were seriously into quilting for about 15 years. I didn't realize that until we had saw your quilting book.
And that's that's about half of what I've done.
Is this one of your quilts right here?
Yeah, it's one I've made since I've lived here.
Uh-huh.
And I've given some away, and I've really enjoyed doing them. There's something very satisfying to me, that repetition
Uh-huh.
for quilts and all. I enjoy doing them, and I would do them and give them away.
So when you're quilting, like so many people describe getting into the zone, when they're
Yeah,
content and concentrated, focused on what they're doing.
right.
And then you get the big payoff at the end is this wonderful quilt, which you
Right.
can oftentimes give to somebody else.
Right.
And are you still, I see you have, one of the things you brought up was your quilting table. You couldn't take it all because you just had so much.
I
But
had so much, but that opens up. The top comes up and the round, and so it opens up for. It's good, and it was a very expensive thing that I bought for myself when I retired.
Mm-hmm.
And then Risk was so excited about my getting this, by myself and going out, that he went out and he bought me a whole bunch of stuff, which was very nice of him.
Uh-huh.
Some things I probably wouldn't have gotten for myself.
Mm-hmm. So that was obviously a lot of time spent and a great hobby for you.
It was.
For many, many years.
Right.
To have a hobby that you could invest so much time in that had a great payoff.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So what else about here do you like or not like, and how do you feel here?
Oh, I've always been kind of quiet. And, here, if I want to read for half a day, I can. Just what I want to do. It's fine with them. And it's very quiet. I'm not in charge of anything. I'm not working for a...
Mm-hmm. You're working for Barbara Harper?
I'm working for Barbara Harper. Things I want to do, and things I want to give away, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to get into some, and this is a good segue into some more philosophical questions. And don't worry, I see that look of fear in your eye. You're not going to be put on the spot, and you can take the fifth for any of these. But for example, here's a question. There's some ages that we look back on favorably and some not so favorably, or even as complete disasters. What age, or you hit the 3-0, the 4-0, the 5-0, the 6-0, the 7-0, for example. What time in your life or what birthday did you feel least enthusiastic about?
Oh.
Or you just thought, like John Lennon said, the 70s, weren't they a drag? And boy, and he was murdered in 1980. But apparently he didn't like the 70s very much. So was there a decade or an era or a period, a time period in your life?
Neighbors, there was one time that I really wasn't happy with my neighborhood, and that was Holland Hills, because there were a lot of people there that were kind of show-offs and not friendly. They were so busy with their own lives, and they weren't warm-hearted.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't neighborly, and I really didn't like that. And I was glad to get out of Holland Hills
Okay.
because they were like that, and kind of know-it-alls too.
Uh-huh.
Especially the men, but the women too.
Okay, so that was Holland Hills. So that was in your 20s, late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah.
Were there any other times that you seriously disliked, or what about times even that you could look back on and you think that was the golden age, or you can't imagine that it could ever be so good ever again?
No.
Or it was always kind of subsistence living and dragging along the bottom of...
I have ups and downs.
Uh-huh.
It's not an up and then a down and then an up. It's more like this.
Right, no matter where you are or what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a lot of it depends on what you're thinking.
Well, true. That's true.
What about growing older? What kind of advice would you give the younger people about growing older and living life? This might get back to regrets that you have, or advice you could give, having done it, learn the hard way, not from learning from the mistakes of others, but learning from your own mistakes. What advice would you give to, say,
I have
little
no
Jessie
advice.
over there?
No advice.
No advice.
No advice. I said, live your life. Do the best you know how. Don't wring your hands and say, oh, I should have done it. I should have done it. I made a big mistake. Believe me, I've made a lot of mistakes. But they're done and they're over and I can't change them.
Uh-huh.
Try not to make any more, which is impossible.
How about preparing for old age? Was it a process, a concrete process where in 5 easy steps, your financial destiny is, you'll have that in control and you'll meet the people that will help you get to achieve?
I'm not interested in achieving anything at this point.
And then you'll wind up.
No, I'm not achieving anything, and I'm not interested.
Okay, but was your life planned out? I guess what I'm saying, where you
I knew
like
I
you
wanted
got to this square in the game of life in Pittsford, New York, and was it planned out that way, or was it just sort of a kind of take it as it comes, and you never know where you're going to be until you wind up there?
No, I'm more
Methodical, focused.
I'm focused,
Uh-huh.
and I'm not going off in all directions. I've always been, get a scholarship, go to the U of R, keep on doing it, do this, do that, get married on. I don't run around making big mistakes. I run around making small mistakes.
Okay, all right. So it's the size and quality of the mistakes that makes all the difference.
Or the size and quality of the good parts.
Good things that you do. Okay, well that's converse, whatever. So what are your plans for the future?
Right now, I have my son here and little Missy over there, and I am very, very happy.
Uh-huh.
Very happy. And when that's over with, then I will do something else that I want to do.
Okay.
Because I have no responsibilities.
Right. You don't have to show up to work on Monday.
Nope, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
But my thing is, my body's starting to fall apart.
Right.
And
So you have to show up at the doctor on Monday.
right, that's my job now.
So let's talk about a little bit more about life lessons and legacy. Do you have a happiest or proudest moment in your life? Or that story that when you tell it, everyone's holding up all 10 fingers and all 10 toes to show you how many times you've already told it?
That happens to me,
Uh-huh.
especially with my sisters.
Well, do you have a favorite story, or like the all-time greatest story ever told in the
No,
family?
no.
Describe, looking back at your past, someone who's had a really profound effect on your life.
A profound effect. Mm-hmm. Well, I think my mother and father were good people, and did the best they knew how, and they modeled that behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been something. Um, I don't like to have confrontations with people
Hmm.
because you don't change their mind. You change people's mind by living in a certain way.
And they were able to show that to you.
And I learned from other people, but I think I've showed myself to other people as well.
Hmm. How about a life experience, a profound life experience that you feel that really changed you?
Change me? I would have to give that some serious thought.
Uh-huh. There's been many, maybe not just one.
Oh, no, there hasn't been one altering experience. There have been lots of small experiences, although I think having 2 children and realizing this was my responsibility and this was no fooling around here. The most important job was that.
Hmm. So how would you define the good life? A good life, or a life well lived, or a successful life, something in those terms? Is it he who dies with the most toys wins? Or what would Donald Trump say? WWDFS. What would what would you say?
Oh, I'd have to think about it because I hate saying something and then 2 years later look back and what an idiot I was saying that.
Um, so we have Jessie here with us. Jessie, why don't you come over here and sit next to Grandma?
If you have Christmas for a favorite holiday, you need some proof. I'll get this pillow for backup.
Okay. That
Okay.
sounds like a plan. Now, Grandma, you mentioned the importance of family and your parents. What kind of advice do you have for this little lady? And she's your only blood grandchild. You've had several grandchildren through Risk's sons, and now you've got Jessie, and Jessie has that Wilsey blood and running through her veins.
Yep, that's
So,
right.
what do you have to say to her?
I'm an only child.
That's true. You're an only child, but you don't want to act like an only child
Yep.
because an only child is like a spoiled brat. And you don't want to act like a spoiled brat.
And I think she's done a good job so far.
Yeah.
She's been a wonderful child.
Yep.
I want to explain the posters.
Okay, and Jessie made some posters here for the video.
Okay.
Oh.
So
Okay.
why don't you explain to Grandma, and then you can, after you're done explaining.
This one's kind of about high school. Like, Daddy has lots of questions.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So there are tons of question
This
marks.
is Daddy, and this is Grandma.
Okay.
You can say draw her a little bit younger.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right.
And with a little less hair.
What?
And with
With a little less hair.
Little less hair? Oh, okay.
Like a pixie cut.
a pixie cut.
Oh.
Okay.
And
Hey,
this
maybe
is
we ought to
Daddy
get
with his-
Grandma a pixie cut when she takes you to get your hair cut. Whatever haircut she gives you, she has to get.
Hey, look at, and this is Daddy with his little hat. Da, 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 and Daddy with his little hat.
Okay.
So funny.
My paperboy hat.
And this is a poster. You see it says poster right here. Literally it does. If you don't see that,
Now, don't act silly. Gotta be serious about this.
here's that other poster.
Let me see.
And Grandma's, and this is part one kind of thing, and it says like, kind of like the story. I just write down Grandma's story of being young, and
Oh.
again it says poster right here, and it says high school, college, and I mean, that's his college and that's his kid.
Uh-huh.
And that's you, Grandma. And this is a blanket with the couch. It's the only one with the couch blanket.
So
And
you
this
were
is
listening.
Daddy, and he almost I almost made him have hair and eyelashes.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't want to make him. I forgot. But then I drawed him with no hair. I forgot the beard, but that's okay because it makes him look a little bit younger, which is lucky because he gets a little more exercise.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, here's the hard one.
Okay, so here is when Grandma was in high school, because in high school they're always like, they emoji, emoji.
Oh, okay,
Kind of
yeah.
like that.
Uh-huh.
And then this is college. It just has a little smile face.
What does
Uh-huh.
it say? What is it? Oh, is that in my face? College.
Mm.
Okay.
It's a smile face because you're happy. And this is, I think it's when you were little. It means when you're little, and one of the papers that say interview in the back, and I was trying to draw other show poster picture, but I didn't want to release. So then this is a child life. I didn't know what to draw for a child life, so I just write like this for child life. You can't really know what it's saying. Let me get it a little closer. I can see stuff. Okay, you can't see. So,
Okay.
Hey, let's talk about you, Jess.
And this is now, okay? This is now. That's Daddy and Grandma.
Okay. Doing the interview. Now we're going to do a little quick interview with you. You've been sitting here listening to Grandma and I talk. What have you learned? What has Grandma taught you?
Well, she has been telling me over and over again to cut my hair.
Okay.
That is true.
So it's important to keep your hair nice and trim.
I've been thinking about it, and I say kind of short, but, and also, I hate when I have to brush my hair. It hurts. That's why I think I'm going to cut my hair. And then maybe they won't recognize me in school, and they'll call me a mystery girl, which I think I like.
Okay.
But then I will tell my true name, and then I'll be over.
So what else did you learn from Grandma?
Well, sometimes, today she said stop kind of being silly, but I like having fun.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Sometimes there's a time for being silly and a time not for being silly.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to figure out when you should do both.
Yes, but
Either one.
did you know one time when I was still in first grade, while I was running on a track, I didn't have to run, so I just walked for a little while and then run, because I was playing a game called like Power Girl, and I really liked it when I was that age. But now I'm 7. I kind of got over that, but I really like the show, so I kind of like made myself in it just for pretend. So that's all. And this is Grandma in a picture in a pillow. It might seem weird. This picture is in a pillow, but just it is what it is.
Uh-huh.
Everything is what it is. So just how to be what it is, right?
Think about that.
Well, yeah, I think yeah, I understand that completely.
So like if you change plans, you have to change plans. If they don't change plans, you don't change plans. That's how it goes. You have to go on the flow.
Go with the flow. Okay. Good.
Thank you very much.
I said go on the flow.
All right. Well, I think with that, maybe we've been doing this for a few hours now. Why don't we
It feels like 20
we'll call it quits, and if we
Call it
think about
quits.
anything else, we'll turn on the video and do some more questions.
Once we've done it this summer, and maybe we could think of next summer
Okay.
and how we've grown and how we are better than we were
Mhm.
and how we need to work on ourselves. What do you think about that?
That sounds good. And what kind of haircuts we're going to get?
Well, that too. That
And
too.
also, next summer, I think Daddy's going to retire and we can like move here if he wants. And that would be awesome. Because I love the farm. I might be a teenager. so I might be a little older, and I know when I'm a teenager, my dad is going to retire, so actually,
You'd like to move to New York.
Yes, I love New York. There's lots of kids to play with every single day. Mostly on the farm, because I love the farm. Kittens, cats, animals, friends, trampoline, everything.
All right.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much, one and all.
Shotgun.
Goodbye.
Shotgun.